Okay, when you go to your lender and say, how much can I borrow? And they say, you can borrow $1 million. I don't care if you can borrow $1 million. Here's your goal. Your goal is to own a home.
You're paying interest.
Oh, I'm going to be paying them $800,000 in interest. The goal is to get a roof over your head and pay it off as soon as possible. And it's kind of a secret that banks don't like to tell you, but you're not going out to McDonald's. You're eating peanut butter jelly sandwiches.
Yeah. Hello everyone, welcome to Legally Bound Business and Real Estate Explained. Today we are going to be talking about the home buying process. Hi everyone, this is Faisal Moghul and we have Mr. Terry Fox with us as well. And like I said, we will be talking about the entire home buying process, in which we will discuss Virginia's caveat emptor standard. What duties does the buyer have when he's buying a home, and what duties does the seller have on the other hand? In this discussion, we will also be talking about the all-important diversion exception to the caveat emptor standard in Virginia. So buckle up and let's get started. All right. So Terry, I recently had a friend who was buying a home right in Vienna, and he calls me up and he's like, yo, dude, the seller never told me about this issue. This is after he had signed, executed the contract. And I had to explain to him, and he's a lawyer himself, that the seller in Virginia generally has no duty to disclose. And silence by itself does not constitute diversion according to Supreme Court case law. So if I am a buyer in today's market, okay, what things should I consider or be aware of when starting my home search process, if you could walk us through?
Sure. Well, in Virginia, most realtors are going to use a standard contract. In Northern Virginia, we have the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors, and there's the Virginia Association of Realtors, and in all the different parts of Virginia, there are associations of realtors, and they basically use the same contract with tiny variations. And the problem with the contract is that it's very seller oriented. And of course, because you're going to talk a lot about caveat emptor, those contracts have to be modified if you are the buyer to protect yourself. So, and of course, you do have options for appraisal contingencies, inspection contingencies, but what we've found is that if a buyer really needs to add additional language so that they are going to be able to do all the inspections they need. And of course, do you want to talk a little bit about caveat emptor?
Sure. So let me talk about what Mr. Fox just said, which is that these NVAR contracts are very pro-seller in many respects. As you all know, caveat emptor, the standard for caveat emptor, places the burden of any due diligence solely on the buyer. The seller generally has no duty to disclose, except for a few limited disclosure obligations that he may have under the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act. Like, my home is close to a military air base, or if the seller's home has previously been used to manufacture meth in a lab, that's what, some of the conditions that the seller has to disclose. But other than that, it's pretty much buyer beware. As that term means. So I am a buyer and I'm looking and I target a house, let's say in Fairfax, okay? And let's say I have a realtor lined up as well. What should my next steps be?
Well, you want to do a little research on the home. How old is it? You want to go to the county and see if there have been any building permits that are outstanding that actually haven't been closed. Because if in fact there was work done and you buy the house and that work required a permit, you are going to be responsible to the county for for redoing the work, possibly tearing out everything and rebuilding it with a new permit. So you want to do some actual research on the home.
So a buyer should definitely go and check out the FIDO database.
Yes, I think that they've now in Fairfax, that's been changed. They have a new database, but even regardless of what county you're in, you should go to the building the building permit office or zoning, and then actually check and see, have any permits been, are there still open permits? The other thing is, when you approach a seller and you want to do inspections, especially recently in the market, there have been so many buyers who, it's a competitive, and they say, okay, I won't do an inspection.
Right.
Which is insane. What you can do, and of course, there have been a lot of people who've called who said, well, we didn't do an inspection because it was a tight market, and we found out the place is riddled with termites, or there's a huge crack in the basement foundation, or the roof leaks like a sieve. Well, the one way to protect yourself from being in that position is to say, look, Mr. Seller, I don't need a contingency on the closing but I do need to be able to do an inspection for information purposes only. Just let me do that, okay? And give them whatever price they want, whatever. The point here is that you want to be able to do inspections.
Because most sellers, they prioritize contracts. Yeah. Which don't have home inspection contingencies.
Right.
Because the seller just wants his money in the easiest transaction possible.
Right.
With all these contingencies, a buyer could potentially back out if he discovers an egregious defect.
So if you tell your agent, say, look, we're going through with the deal, we just want to do the inspections for information purposes only. Mm-hmm. So what that gets you the right to do the inspections.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if you find out something's really terrible? One of the things that you really do need to change in the contract is the liability on default. And so one of the things that we add to our contracts is an addenda that specifically lays out the inspections you want. You want all 5 disciplines. You want a plumber, a roofer, an HVAC, an electrician, and a structural engineer, especially for very old homes.
Key points.
Okay? Yes. Then you want something that says, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in the contract, upon a buyer's default, seller's sole remedy shall be limited to the earnest money deposit or $10,000 or something. And the reason why you put this in there is because the standard contract, if you default, if you don't show up at closing,
liability.
You could be sued for the difference in contract price between your contract and the one that they gave. And you'd have to pay for attorney's fees. So
let's break this out in the form of an example for our audience. So I have a contract with you. I'm a buyer, you're a seller. You're selling me your home for $100,000, right?
Yeah.
I, as the buyer, then default on your contract.
Yeah, for some reason, and the most, well, it can be a couple different reasons, but let's just say your lender just doesn't come up with the money. Yeah. Even though you got your written conditional commitment to loan the money. Yeah. The underwriter, 3 days before closing, says, no, I don't like your application. I'm not giving you the money. And there you are on the day of closing. You can't give me $100,000. You're now in default. So you're in default. I go out, I put it up for listing, and I find somebody to buy it for $80,000. Okay, I'm now going to sue you for the difference between the 100 and the 80 and my attorney's fees.
And you get to keep the earnest money deposit that also.
Well, the way the contracts are being written now is that you have a choice. You can either take the earnest money as liquidated damages or the difference in the contract. Sometimes, in this market, in this area where homes are going for $1.2 million and somebody defaults, well, you may not find somebody who's going to buy it for, $10,000 less. It's probably going to be a couple $100,000. And that's what they would sue you for.
So the buyer is exposed in these contracts, and it would behoove him to limit his liability.
With that language that says, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in the contract, upon a buyer's default, the seller's sole remedy shall be X. Now so if you can't close, at least your liability is X. It's not going to be the difference of, it's not going to be $200,000 if that's what it ends up being paid for. So that's one thing that we do. And then,
so speaking of, we talked about the caveat emptor standard earlier, and we talked about a breach by the buyer. Let's quickly touch base on what the diversion exception is. Now, folks, while the law may place the burden of any due diligence regarding the condition of the property on the buyer, remember, this does not mean that the seller has a license to misrepresent.
correct.
In other words, the seller cannot engage in any affirmative act or make any affirmative misstatement to divert the buyer's investigation. Remember, staying silent is not enough to constitute diversion, okay? Nor does case law require a seller in Virginia to affirmatively disclose any potential latent defect, okay? So with that standard in mind, understand this is a very tough and high standard for buyers to meet, particularly when they're making perhaps what could be their most important investment in their entire life. Okay, so depending on what the reasons why a person is buying a home, like this is my forever home, this is my first home, or this is my home for the next couple of years. Is there a change in any strategy that comes with it in terms of due diligence if you're a buyer?
Well, in Virginia, not really. I mean, there are, when you're buying your very first home, there are some things that you should do as much due diligence as you can. You want to make sure that, and my advice for people like that is, okay, when you go to your lender and say, how much can I borrow? And they say, you can borrow $1 million. Okay, well, if this is your first home, here's your goal. Your goal is to own a home that you don't owe any money on except for taxes and insurance. So that means the goal is to get a roof over your head and pay it off as soon as possible. So you buy the cheapest home you can. I don't care if you can borrow $1 million. If you can find a condo or a townhouse for $500,000, buy that. Pay it off in 7 years. And it's kind of a secret that banks don't like to tell you, but generally, when they give you a loan, they have already figured out how much discretionary income you have. And they know that if you took all of your extra money, and just kept enough money to eat and pay the insurance, you applied all of that extra to the principal of this 30-year fixed note, you could pay it off in 7 years. And that's what you want to do with this first home. You want to pay it off in 7 years so that no matter what you do now, you have a roof over your head. There is not a bank that can come and get you.
Speaking of that issue, folks, if you look at your amortization statements, okay, that when you're getting a loan from a bank, look at your amortization statements. They tend to front load all the interest.
Oh, they do. And the nice
in the beginning, you're not even sort of gathering a lot of equity in the condition and in the property itself. You're paying interest.
Yeah, and it's really kind of, well, one thing, the new closing disclosures actually have a page where they show you, okay, you're buying a home for $600,000. Here's the amount of interest you are going to pay over 30 years. And you're going to see, wow, I'm going to be paying them $800,000 in interest for a $500,000 home. Okay, and you can get away with that by paying all of your anything, any dime, any money you get, throw that at principal, and it will be down in 7 years. So it's an important secret. I mean, you're not going out to McDonald's. You're eating peanut butter jelly sandwiches. and there are no vacations. But the thing is, think of it, you pay off, you own that home. Now, all of that money you can invest. You could actually buy another home and then go ahead and buy it and rent out this one and then live in a nicer home for a time.
Okay, now let's talk about situations where a person has done his financial homework. Okay, he's qualified to buy a home. And now he wants to hire a good realtor, okay, or a broker. What considerations should go into play before a guy decides to go with a broker or before he starts his home search?
Yeah, well, you certainly want to look up their DPOR record to make sure that they haven't been disciplined for any reasons, you know. I think hiring a good broker is important, but regardless of the broker, you need to hire an attorney as well, because there are things that brokers cannot do with these contracts that an attorney can do. And then ultimately, only an attorney is going to have the fiduciary obligations to you that a broker really won't have. They are allowed to make mistakes, you know.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. In all your years of dealing with conflicts, purchase and sale, contract breaches, what is the craziest case or scenario that you've ever come across?
Oh, well, it's crazy. It's sad. We had a case where somebody bought a home from an elderly person who was needed to go to a home, and there were termites. There were so many termites. Oh, the house pretty much had to be torn down. The other crazy case was a builder sold a home.
Builders don't do that. Yeah.
There was so much black mold because the roof was so bad, you could push your hand through the drywall and see all the black mold behind it. It was, and of course,
You freshly painted it with
yeah. And this builder then tried to put caulk over it and drywall paint.
Now, folks, that's diversion, okay? Because that's the seller engaging in affirmative actions to divert the buyer, in this case, painting over the defective areas.
Oh, and
It's concealment.
Yeah, they had in that particular issue, they had done all kinds of things to conceal unpermitted work, so that was really bad. Now, the sad thing about the termite case was I don't think there was really any evidence that they tried to hide it. There was one floor.
I don't remember.
Yeah, but talking about diversion, that is, if you're a seller, don't hide stuff.
Yes. So that's actually the best thing that you can do. You can stay silent, but if you try to conceal or if you try to misrepresent, you say something affirmative,
And unfortunately, in the builder's case, they didn't do any inspections on their own. They were completely left open to caveat emptor. And in the termite case, if they had done more inspections, if you can hire termite pest inspection people to come in and do sound testing, behind walls and stuff. So really, in Virginia, you just you need to be able to bring in all of the 5 disciplines in a home inspection. And by the way, because they'll say, "Well, I did a home inspection."
Yeah, why isn't a home inspection sufficient in situations?
They are, there's a very nice association where they have people who do have experience in noticing things, and they can notice that, that electrical plug doesn't seem quite right. I think.
Or the foundation seems to have.
The foundation,
there.
when I put a pencil down, it rolls. But they're not, what you will see in their reports is, the electrical cord isn't tied off correctly. I recommend you hire an electrician, or the plumber. There's a leak in the bathroom, in the guest bathroom. I suggest you hire a plumber.
So they basically just point out where the issues could be, and it's your job as a buyer to dig
To
further.
then hire a plumber, to hire an electrician.
And that's the caveat emptor standard, folks.
And here's the thing, if you get this report and that's all you look at and you don't do anything else, well, or let's say that the home inspector, sees some plumbing problems, but he doesn't see them all. He's only going to be, if you look at their contract, he's only going to be liable for the cost of the inspection.
Correct.
So even if it turns out that you have a $300,000 plumbing problem and you didn't know about it because he didn't catch them all, well, you can only sue him for the $400 you paid him for the inspection.
And that, folks, should conclude our discussion today on the home buying process in Virginia and what considerations you should take into account. If you like this discussion, please don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.
Bye.